There are moments in life when time seems to freeze, when the weight of a single second crushes you like an avalanche. For me, that moment came on an ordinary afternoon, just another day in our quiet suburban life. I was sitting on the couch, exhausted from work, when my 6-year-old son, Ethan, walked up to me, his small hands gripping my wife's phone. His face was pale, his lips trembling. "Daddy," he whispered, holding the phone out to me, "what does this mean?" I frowned, taking the phone from his hands. The screen was still unlocked, a messaging app open. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at, just a bunch of texts, pictures, and videos. Then, realization hit me like a freight train. Explicit messages. Intimate words. And a name I hadn't heard in years. Mr. Callahan. The breath caught in my throat. Mr. Callahan was our old high school teacher, the same man who taught us both junior year English, the same man my wife had always spoken about with a hint of admiration. The timestamps on the messages told a brutal story. The affair hadn't started recently. Not in the last year. Not even since our wedding. It had been going on for 10 years. I felt my stomach twist. 10 years. That meant she had been cheating since she was 16, since we were just kids ourselves, before we were even engaged, before we built a life together. I clenched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My son looked up at me, confused, scared. I had to act fast. Silently, I stood, walked to the bedroom, and started packing our bags. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at the messages on Claire's phone. Minutes? Hours? Time seemed to blur. My fingers trembled as I scrolled, reading through years of betrayal laid out in casual, intimate exchanges. "You were always my favorite student. Can't wait to see you again, just like old times. Your husband doesn't make you feel like I do, does he?" There were pictures too, some of her, some of him. Some I couldn't even stomach looking at. The way she smiled at him, the way she spoke to him, it wasn't just lust. It was affection. A kind of warmth I hadn't seen in her eyes for a long time. A lump formed in my throat. How long had she been pretending with me? The worst part was the timestamps. The affair had never stopped. Not when we got engaged. Not when we got married. Not even when Ethan was born. I felt sick. I gripped the phone so tightly I thought I might break it. My breath came in slow, shaky inhales, my mind clouded with rage, heartbreak, disbelief. And then, through the storm in my head, I heard the small, trembling voice behind me. "Daddy?" I turned and saw Ethan standing there, his little hands clenched at his sides. His wide brown eyes, Claire's eyes, were full of confusion. His gaze flickered to the phone in my hand. He had seen enough to know. My stomach twisted. My son, our son, had been the one to uncover this. How much had he read? Did he even understand what he had seen? I swallowed back the bitterness rising in my throat and forced my voice to be steady. "It's okay, buddy," I said. "Everything's okay." He didn't look convinced. I had to move. I had to get out. I shoved Claire's phone into my pocket, stood up, and walked past Ethan into the bedroom. My heart pounded in my chest, my movements mechanical as I pulled out a suitcase. I packed without thinking. A few shirts, a pair of jeans. Socks, underwear. My toothbrush. Deodorant. It felt like I was moving underwater, like none of this was real. But it was. Every few seconds, I'd glance at Ethan, who stood frozen in the doorway, hugging his stuffed bear to his chest. He looked so small. So unsure. My son needed me to be strong. I exhaled and forced my hands to steady as I grabbed his backpack and filled it with his clothes, his books, the little things he'd need. "Daddy?" he asked again. "Where are we going?" I zipped up the bags and turned to him, my expression unreadable. We're going away for a little bit. Is Mommy coming? I hesitated, just for a second. Then, I shook my head. No. Ethan didn't argue. He just nodded, eyes glistening, and that simple motion almost broke me. He didn't ask, why. He didn't plead for an explanation. Maybe, deep down, he already knew something was wrong. I pulled open the nightstand drawer and stared at my wedding ring. My fingers traced the smooth band, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. It had meant something once. It had symbolized a promise, one she had broken over and over again. I took the ring off and set it down. I wouldn't need it anymore. I grabbed the bags, took Ethan's hand, and walked out the door without looking back. Let her come home to an empty house. Let her wonder what happened. Because the moment I stepped out that door, Claire was already dead to me. The road stretched before me, endless and dark. The only sound was the soft hum of the tires against the pavement, the occasional whoosh of passing streetlights illuminating the car in flickering bursts. Ethan sat in the back, his little face pressed against the window, eyes half-lidded from exhaustion. He hadn't said much since we left, not that I blamed him. I hadn't said much either. What could I say? That his mother, the woman who kissed him goodnight and packed his lunches, had been lying to us both for a decade? That I was just as blindsided as he was? That I had no idea what came next? I clenched the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I still had Claire's phone in my pocket. I hadn't turned it off. I hadn't even looked at it since we left. Because if I did, I knew I'd see more. More messages. More confessions. More proof that the life I thought I had was never real. I wasn't ready for that. Instead, I focused on the road, on the weight of my son in the back seat, on the fact that, for the first time in years, Claire wasn't beside me. And somehow, despite the rage burning in my chest, despite the betrayal that threatened to crush me, a single thought kept repeating in my mind. I feel lighter. Like a chain had been snapped. Like I had just stepped out of a burning house before the roof collapsed. It scared me how much that realization didn't hurt. I pulled into a cheap roadside motel just outside of town. The neon sign flickered, buzzing against the silence of the night. It wasn't much, but it was far enough, at least for now. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and turned to Ethan. "Buddy," I said gently. "We're here." He rubbed his eyes, blinking at me in the dim light. "Where's Mommy?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "She's not coming." His small face scrunched in confusion, but he didn't cry. He just nodded. That simple gesture made my heart ache. I grabbed our bags, took his tiny hand in mine, and led him into the motel. The room smelled like stale air and old carpet, but I didn't care. I dropped the bags by the door and sat Ethan on the bed, helping him out of his shoes. "Are we gonna go home tomorrow?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. Home. The place where Claire would be. Where she would pretend nothing had happened. Where she would lie, and manipulate, and try to salvage the ashes of our marriage. No. I wasn't going back. Not yet. I tucked Ethan under the thin motel blanket, smoothing his hair as his breathing slowed. And for the first time since I saw those messages, I let myself break. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, and let the anger, the grief, the pure betrayal crash into me all at once. My wife had been living a double life. I had been raising a child with a woman who wasn't mine. And worst of all, she thought I would never find out. I reached into my pocket, pulled out Claire's phone, and turned it over in my hands. She didn't deserve my silence. She deserved my revenge. I sat in the dim glow of the motel's bedside lamp, Claire's phone burning in my hands. My fingers hovered over the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Part of me wanted to throw it against the wall, smash it to pieces and be done with it. But the smarter part of me, the part that wasn't drowning in rage, knew this phone held everything. Proof. Evidence. Answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to. I took a slow, steadying breath and unlocked it. The messages were still there, right where I had left them. I forced myself to read. Missed you today. Can't stop thinking about our last time. You're always so tense when you talk about him. Do you even love him? You know what we had was real, Claire. It always has been. Every word twisted the knife deeper. Then, the photos. Some were innocent enough, just pictures of them at a coffee shop, walking together, sitting in his car. If I hadn't known what I was looking for, I would have thought they were just old friends catching up. But then, the other ones. Her, lying in a hotel bed, the sheets pulled up just enough to leave little to the imagination. A mirror selfie in nothing but lingerie, her hair messy, lips slightly parted. The timestamp said it was taken 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. While I was at home, making dinner. While I was helping Ethan with his homework. While I was texting her goodnight, telling her I loved her. My grip tightened around the phone. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't something I could rationalize. This was intentional. She had chosen him, again and again. And now, I was choosing myself. I exited the messages and scrolled through her contacts until I found his name, Mr. Callahan. No first name. Just that. As if he still had some twisted authority over her. I clicked his profile and scrolled down. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I found it. An address. My heart slammed against my ribs. For 10 years, this man had stolen from me. My trust. My marriage. My family. And he had no idea that I was coming for him. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and reached for the door. Daddy? I froze. Ethan's small voice cut through the storm in my head like a blade. I turned around, my hand still on the doorknob. He was sitting up in bed, rubbing his tired eyes. Where are you going? I let out a slow breath, forcing my fingers to relax. I couldn't leave him. Not like this. Not tonight. I walked back over, sat on the edge of the bed, and pulled him into a hug. I'm right here, buddy, I whispered. I felt his tiny arms wrap around me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, my anger took a back seat. Ethan was the only thing that mattered. Not revenge. Not rage. Him. I lay down beside him, pulling the blanket over us both, and forced myself to close my eyes. Tomorrow, I would end this. But tonight? Tonight, I would just be his father. I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Ethan's steady breathing the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and the sharp, unrelenting need for justice. Claire thought she could get away with it. She thought I would be the fool in this story. She had no idea what was coming. I reached for my phone, the one she didn't know I had. Claire's phone was still on the nightstand, but my own was in my pocket. I hadn't turned it off, hadn't let my emotions get the better of me. Because I needed a plan. I scrolled through my contacts, landing on the name I hadn't called in years. Mason Carter. Mason and I had been close back in high school. Unlike me, he'd taken a different path, one that led him into the world of private investigations. He wasn't a cop, but he was the kind of guy who could dig up anything for the right price. And right now, I needed everything. I hit the call button. It rang twice before a groggy voice answered. Do you have any idea what time it is? Mason, I said, my voice low. I need a favor. A pause. Then, the sound of shuffling as he sat up. Alex? Man, I haven't heard from you in years. I know, I said. And I wouldn't be calling if it wasn't serious. Another pause. I could almost hear him sizing up the situation. Talk to me. I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Claire's been cheating. I didn't have to explain the rest. Mason let out a slow whistle. Damn. That's rough. It's more than that, I said. It's been going on for 10 years. With our old high school teacher. Silence. Then, a low curse. Are you serious? Dead serious. I heard the sound of a lighter flicking, followed by an exhale. What do you need? I need everything on him, I said. Where he lives, his finances, any dirt you can find. You planning on going after him? I didn't answer. Mason sighed. Look, I'll see what I can dig up. Give me a few hours. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I appreciate it. No problem. Just, don't do anything stupid, Alex. I hung up without responding. Because at this point, stupid was exactly what I had in mind. The morning sun crept through the motel blinds, casting thin golden stripes across the room. Ethan was still asleep, curled into the blankets, his little face peaceful despite the storm raging around us. I sat at the edge of the bed, Claire's phone in one hand, my own in the other. I had a message from Mason. Mason, got what you need. Call me. I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Ethan, and stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The motel parking lot was nearly empty, just a few trucks parked outside the diner across the street. I dialed. Mason picked up immediately. I hope you're sitting down for this, he said. I leaned against the car. I'm standing. Just tell me. Mason let out a slow breath. Your boy Callahan. He's worse than you think. I clenched my jaw. How bad? Mason hesitated. The guy's been grooming students for years. I felt my stomach drop. What? You heard me, Mason said. Claire wasn't the first, and she wasn't the last. I found reports, rumors mostly, things that never made it to court. Girls from different graduating classes. A few parents tried to raise alarms, but nothing ever stuck. I swallowed hard, my grip on the phone tightening. He's smart, Mason continued. Knows how to cover his tracks. No criminal record, no official complaints, nothing that would get him fired. He's been protected. I ran a hand through my hair. Protected by who? Mason sighed. The school. The district. Maybe even some local officials. He's been around for 20 years, Alex. You think he lasted that long without someone looking the other way? My blood ran cold. I had thought this was just my nightmare. Just my life being torn apart. But Callahan wasn't just some guy having an affair. He was a predator. And no one had stopped him. Where is he now? I asked. Mason paused. His house. I got the address. You sure you want to do this? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. By the time I got back inside, Ethan was stirring. Daddy? His voice was groggy. I crouched beside the bed, brushing his hair from his face. Yeah, buddy. Are we going home today? I exhaled slowly. Not yet, kiddo. He frowned but didn't argue. I kissed his forehead, then stood. Stay here for a bit, okay? I'll get us breakfast. I grabbed my keys and slipped Claire's phone into my pocket. It was time to pay a visit to Mr. Callahan. The drive to Callahan's house was quiet. Too quiet. The world outside moved as if nothing had changed, as if my entire life hadn't just been ripped apart. Cars passed, people walked their dogs, coffee shops bustled with early risers. But inside me, a storm was brewing. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Mason's words echoed in my head. He's been doing this for years. He's been protected. He thinks he's untouchable. Not anymore. I pulled onto his street, a quiet neighborhood with neatly trimmed lawns and two-car garages. His house was just like the others, normal. A plain brick home, a blue sedan parked in the driveway. I almost laughed. How many times had I imagined this guy? Some slick womanizer, some gym-obsessed younger man. But Callahan was just average. That made it worse. I parked a few houses down, my hands steady, my pulse hammering. What was I going to do? Beat him to a pulp? Scream in his face? Demand answers he would never give me? I didn't know. I just knew I had to see him. I climbed out of the car and walked up to the front door. My hands curled into fists. My mind screamed at me to stop, to think, to breathe. But I knocked anyway. A few seconds passed. Then the door opened. And there he was. Mr. Callahan. He was older now, mid-40s, with graying hair at his temples and a neatly pressed button-up. He looked exactly the same as I remembered, just a little more tired, a little softer around the edges. For a moment, he just stared at me. His brow furrowed, his lips parted slightly, as if trying to place me. Then, recognition dawned. Alex. Hearing him say my name sent rage flooding through my veins. His expression flickered, something between shock and amusement. Like this was funny to him. Like I was just another old student, coming back to reminisce. He started. I punched him. Hard. His head snapped back, his body crashing into the doorframe before he stumbled to the floor. For a second, he just lay there, blinking up at me, stunned. Then, he laughed. Laughed. I grabbed him by the collar, dragging him up, slamming him against the wall. You think this is funny? I snarled. He winced but didn't fight back. His lip was split, blood trickling down his chin. I take it Claire finally told you. I tightened my grip. She didn't have to. I saw everything. His eyes darkened, the amusement fading. I see. I shoved him harder. You took 10 years of my life. You took my wife before she was even mine. You took everything from me. He exhaled, his jaw clenching. I didn't take anything. She came to me. Something inside me snapped. I pulled back my fist. I wouldn't do that if I were you, he muttered. I hesitated. And then I saw it, the shift in his eyes. This man wasn't scared. He wasn't guilty. He was confident. Smug. Like he still had control. Like he still had a hold on her. My stomach turned. I let go of his collar, stepping back. What did you do to her? He licked the blood from his lip, straightening his shirt. You already know, Alex. My breathing was ragged. My fists trembled. I wanted to hurt him. But that wasn't enough. Hurting him wouldn't fix this. I had to destroy him. I took a step back, turned, and walked away. As I reached my car, he called after me. She'll come back to me, you know. I stopped. My jaw clenched. I was her first, he continued, his voice smug. You were just the distraction. I didn't turn around. I just got into my car and drove away. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I drove. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away from that house, from him. From the smug grin, from the way he acted like he still had control. But he didn't. Not anymore. My hands trembled against the wheel. The rage inside me hadn't faded, it had just changed. Hardened. Hitting him wouldn't have been enough. I wanted him to feel what I was feeling. I wanted his life to burn the way he had burned mine. Claire had made her choice. Now, I was making mine. By the time I pulled into the motel parking lot, the sun was high, the morning chill long gone. My body was still tense, my mind running in circles, but I forced myself to focus. Ethan needed me. I stepped inside the room and found him sitting on the bed, his little hands gripping his stuffed bear. His eyes met mine instantly. "You okay, Daddy?" I swallowed, nodding. "Yeah, bud. Just had to take care of something." He studied me, as if trying to decide if I was telling the truth. Then, he nodded. "I'm hungry," he mumbled. I exhaled. "All right. Let's get some breakfast." We packed up, loaded into the car, and drove down the street to a small diner. A normal moment in the middle of a storm. I let Ethan order pancakes, extra syrup, extra whipped cream. For the next 20 minutes, I forced myself to be present. To listen to him talk about his favorite cartoons. To watch as he smeared syrup across his cheek. To remind myself that he was the only thing that mattered now. Then my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. "Mason, you're gonna want to see this." My gut twisted. I wiped my hands on a napkin and stepped outside to call him. Mason answered on the first ring. "You made the news." I blinked. "What?" "Your little visit to Callahan." He sighed. "Someone must have seen you, because the police got called. No charges, but, people are talking." I ran a hand down my face. "Great. That's not all," Mason said. His voice had a tone. "A warning." "What?" I asked. "I dug deeper," he said. "Callahan's been funding something. I don't know exactly what yet, but money's been moving through accounts that don't add up." I frowned. "Funding what?" "That's the question," Mason muttered. "And here's the kicker, your wife. She's involved." The world tilted. "What?" I whispered. "Bank transfers. A second phone. She's been helping him." My breath caught. Helping him do what? I gripped the phone so hard my fingers ached. Mason sighed. "Alex. I don't think this is just an affair anymore." I closed my eyes. Neither did I. I sat in the car, my grip on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Mason's words echoed in my head. Callahan's been funding something. Claire is involved. This isn't just an affair anymore. A second phone. Bank transfers. My wife wasn't just cheating on me, she was covering for him. The air in my lungs felt thick, suffocating. I turned to look through the diner window. Ethan sat at the booth, swinging his legs, happily poking at his pancakes with his fork. So innocent. He had no idea his mother had been living a double life. I forced myself to speak. "Mason, tell me everything." "I don't have all the details yet," he admitted. "But I traced a few payments. Claire's been sending money, large amounts, to an unregistered account. Started about a year ago, but I wouldn't be surprised if this has been happening longer. She's careful. Different banks. Different transaction names." I swallowed hard. "And Callahan? He's got his hands in something shady," Mason said. "It's not just the affairs, Alex. There's more. This guy has a pattern, he finds young girls, manipulates them, and somehow always comes out clean. The money? No idea yet. But your wife is a part of it." I shut my eyes, inhaling deeply. All this time, I had been thinking Claire was just cheating. That she had fallen into an affair, one she was too selfish to stop. But what if she wasn't just a victim of Callahan? What if she was helping him? My stomach turned. "Alex," Mason said carefully, "I know you want revenge. But you need to be smart about this. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My own eyes looked different. Like a man I didn't recognize. I'm done playing nice, I muttered. Mason sighed. I figured you'd say that. Look, I'll keep digging. But in the meantime, you need to be careful. If Claire knows you're onto her, she might. She doesn't know a thing. And I was going to keep it that way. For now. I hung up and forced myself to breathe. Then, I got out of the car, walked into the diner, and sat back down across from Ethan. He looked up at me with those same big, trusting eyes. Everything okay, Daddy? I managed a smile. Yeah, buddy. Everything's okay. But it wasn't. Not yet. But soon, I would make it okay. No matter what it took. By the time we left the diner, my mind was already 5 steps ahead. I had spent the last 24 hours reeling from the shock of it all, the betrayal, the deception, the 10 years of my life wasted on a woman who never really belonged to me. But now, I was focused. Claire and Callahan thought they had this all figured out. They thought I was just another clueless husband who would either crumble under the truth or walk away quietly. They were wrong. I wasn't going to crumble. And I damn sure wasn't walking away. I was going to destroy them. I took Ethan back to the motel and turned on the TV, handing him the remote. Stay here, buddy, I said gently. I need to go take care of something. He blinked up at me, chewing his lip. Where are you going? I hesitated. What could I tell him? That his mother had betrayed us. That I was about to turn her world upside down. I'll be back soon, I said instead. He nodded slowly, his little hands gripping his stuffed bear. I walked out, locking the door behind me. Then, I drove. I wasn't going to confront Claire. Not yet. No, I had something better in mind. I called Mason as I pulled onto the highway. You still looking into Callahan? I asked. Yeah, Mason said. Why? I need everything you've got. Now. Mason exhaled. Alex, I get that you're pissed, but I don't want a lecture, I cut in. I want leverage. A pause. Then, Mason sighed. Fine. You want leverage? Here's what I got. He rattled off a list. Callahan had been blackmailing students for years. Not just girls he slept with, anyone he could control. If a student got caught drinking, cheating on a test, skipping school, he knew about it. And he used it. And Claire. She had been helping him cover his tracks. I clenched my jaw. How do I prove it? Mason hesitated. If I were you, I'd hit him where it hurts. Which is his reputation. I had my plan within the hour. It was risky. It was dangerous. But it would ruin them both. I drove back into town and parked outside Claire's office. She wasn't home, I had checked. I still had her phone. And I was about to use it. I unlocked it, scrolled through her messages, and found exactly what I was looking for, private conversations with Callahan. Messages she thought were safe. They weren't. I selected a few of the worst ones. Screenshots of their affair. Screenshots of money transfers. Then, I sent them. To her boss. To the school board. To a local news reporter. Then, I did the same with Callahan's phone records, the ones Mason had dug up. I sent everything. And then, I waited. The fallout was instant. By the next morning, it was everywhere. Headlines blasted across news sites. Local teacher exposed in school scandal. Inappropriate relationship with students uncovered. Money laundering linked to high school staff. Claire lost her job. Callahan was placed on immediate leave. The police were investigating. The school was scrambling. And Claire. She finally called me. 36 missed calls. I let them ring. Then, finally, I picked up. Her voice was shaking. "Alex, what did you do?" I smiled. "Exactly what you deserved." She sobbed. Begged. Pleaded. I hung up. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt free. Claire tried to fight the divorce. She tried to spin the story. But the evidence was too much. I got full custody of Ethan. Callahan was arrested a month later. Turns out, Mason had dug up more than we expected. Evidence of him grooming underage students. He wasn't just fired. He was going to prison. And Claire. She was alone. Her family abandoned her. Her friends cut ties. I didn't hate her. I didn't need to. Because in the end, she had destroyed herself. And I had finally gotten my revenge.